I was holding my son when Susan walked through the arrivals gate, and the first thing I noticed wasn't her face. It was her tan. 11 months in London and she'd somehow come back sun-kissed, glowing, her hair longer than I remembered, cut in soft layers around her face like she'd stepped out of a magazine. She saw us and her whole body lit up, and for one merciless second I almost let myself believe none of it was true. Then she reached for our son, and I stepped back. "David," she said, her arms still out, hovering in the air like she hadn't understood yet what my body had already told her. "Not yet," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. It came out flat and quiet, the way I imagine a judge sounds right before sentencing. "We need to talk first." She laughed, a nervous little exhale. "Okay, is something wrong? Is Caleb okay?" She reached out again to touch our son's cheek, and Caleb, 10 months old, squirmed and reached for me instead, like even he could feel something had shifted in the air. "He's fine," I said. "I know about Tyler." I watched her face do something I will never forget as long as I live. It didn't crumble right away. First it went blank, a kind of frozen calculation, like she was running through every possible lie she could still tell. Then, slowly, the blankness collapsed into something rawer. Guilt. Not surprise. Guilt. That was how I knew for certain, before she'd said a single word in her own defense, that every single thing I'd pieced together over the last 6 weeks was real. To understand how much that guilt cost me, you have to understand what I gave her first. I met Susan in our sophomore year of college, in a shared economics class neither of us wanted to be in. She sat 2 rows ahead of me and argued with the professor about supply curves like her life depended on being right, and I decided within the week that I wanted to marry her someday. It took 2 more years before I worked up the nerve to actually tell her that, and somehow, impossibly, she felt the same. We built something slow and real after the camping trips with my truck breaking down halfway up the mountain, her cooking disasters that set off the smoke alarm twice a month, 4 years of being each other's whole world. When she got into the graduate exchange program in London, a 12-month international business fellowship, the kind of opportunity that could make an entire career, I was the one who told her to go. She'd wanted it since she was 19. I wasn't going to be the reason she gave up her dream. Then she found out she was pregnant, 3 months before she was set to leave. We sat on the floor of our apartment that night, the pregnancy test on the coffee table between us like a live grenade, and she cried and said she'd defer the program, she'd give it up, it didn't matter. And I remember taking her hands and telling her no. We'd figure it out. I'd take on more hours at the firm, I'd handle things at home, and she would go finish what she started, because I loved her too much to watch her resent either of us for the rest of her life. I sold my motorcycle to help cover the gap in her stipend. I picked up every overtime shift my manager would give me. I learned to swaddle a newborn alone at 3 in the morning, singing off-key to a baby who didn't care that I couldn't carry a tune, because his mother was 6 time zones away finishing her degree, the degree I had helped pay for, the degree I had begged her not to sacrifice. And every night, 4 months, she called. She'd hold her laptop up so I could see her dorm room, tell me how much she missed us, cry actual tears when Caleb learned to roll over and she wasn't there to see it in person. 3 weeks before she came home, she told me she loved me so much it physically hurt to be away, that the second the program ended she was never leaving my side again. And now this. Now the guilt on her face in an airport terminal, with our son's tiny fist wrapped around my collar. I hadn't planned to confront her at the airport. That wasn't the plan at all. 6 weeks earlier, when a coworker of mine named Chris who'd flown to London for a conference sent me a photo he thought I'd find funny, of some guy who looked exactly like they went to school with Susan, having dinner with her at a restaurant near her dorm. Sitting far too close. His hand on the small of her back as they left. I told myself there was an explanation. Then a package arrived at our apartment addressed to her from a jewelry store in Chelsea, and I told myself that was innocent too. Then, one night, her laptop camera caught a reflection in the window behind her, a man's face, unmistakable, watching her from the doorway of a room that was not her dorm. I hired a private investigator the week after that. Chris helped me find him. What came back wasn't a guess anymore. It was a file, names, dates, a hotel receipt, message screenshots pulled from a shared cloud account she'd forgotten was still logged in on our old family tablet. Tyler Bishop. Her high school crush, the one she used to mention with a laugh like it was ancient history, reconnected with her on Instagram 4 months into her program, and by month 5, according to the messages, they weren't just talking about old times anymore. 8 months. Nearly the entire back half of her time abroad. So no, I hadn't planned the airport. But when I saw her walk through that gate glowing with a tan she'd gotten God knows where, doing God knows what, I couldn't wait 1 more hour to say it out loud. "You're lying," she tried, right there by baggage claim, voice pitching high. "Tyler is just an old friend, David, we ran into each other at an alumni thing, that's all." I have the messages, I said. I have the hotel receipt from March. I have a photo of his hand on your back outside a restaurant in February. Don't. Her face went white. She actually looked around, like she was checking whether anyone was watching us, which told me everything about her priorities in that moment. Can we not do this here? She whispered. You didn't think about where when you were doing it, I said. We didn't do it there. We did it 3 hours later, in our living room, after I'd put Caleb down for his nap with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. And then I let out everything I'd been holding for 6 weeks. I didn't yell at first. I laid the folder on the coffee table, the same coffee table where she'd once cried over a positive pregnancy test, and I opened it page by page. The photo. The receipt. The messages, printed out, dated. I watched her read her own words back to her. I miss you every second you're not here. I don't know how I'm supposed to go back to my old life after this. Words meant for Tyler, dated the same week she'd told me over video call that being away from me physically hurt. That's when the yelling started. Mine first years of held-together composure finally breaking, my voice cracking as I asked her how she could hold our son on a screen with one hand and type those words with the other. Hers next, a wall of excuses. She was lonely. She was drowning under the pressure of the program and new motherhood happening a world apart from each other. Tyler made her feel like herself again, the girl she'd been before diapers and deadlines. She swore it started as nothing. She swore she'd been planning to end it before she came home. You didn't end it, I said. You came home and let me carry our son up to you like nothing happened. She broke down fully then, sobbing into her hands, admitting it in pieces I hadn't even asked for, how they'd started messaging in month 2, how it became physical by month 5, how there'd been a stretch in the summer where she'd genuinely considered not coming back at all, staying in London, staying with him. She tried, at the very end, to turn it around on me, said I'd been so consumed with the baby and work that she'd felt invisible, that I'd pushed her into someone else's arms without meaning to. I stood up so fast the folder slid off the table. I sold my bike for your tuition, I said. I learned to change diapers alone at 3 a.m. so you could finish your degree. Don't you dare tell me I pushed you into his bed. She had nothing left to throw back at that. I walked to the bedroom, opened the drawer where I kept the ring box, the one I'd been saving to formally propose again once she was home, since we'd only done a quiet promise before she left, and I set it on the table between us instead. We're done, I said. Not on pause. Done. She grabbed for the ring like it still meant something. I took it back out of her hand. You don't get to keep anything that was a promise, I said. Pack a bag. You can stay at your parents' tonight. We'll talk about Caleb through a lawyer. She left an hour later, mascara streaked down both cheeks, and I stood in the doorway holding our son on my hip and watched the cab pull away, and something in my chest that had been holding on for 11 months finally let go. I broke down that same night, once Caleb was asleep and the apartment was silent enough that I couldn't distract myself anymore. I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet and cried harder than I had since I was a kid, grieving a version of my life I'd been building since sophomore year of college that no longer existed. I thought about every sacrifice, the overtime, the motorcycle, the sleepless nights, and how none of it had been enough to keep her faithful, and for a while that thought nearly buried me. But grief has a shelf life, and mine expired somewhere around 3 in the morning, replaced by something colder and far more useful. I wasn't going to spend one more night crying over a woman who'd spent 8 months lying to my face while I raised our son alone. I was going to make sure she understood exactly what she'd thrown away. I called Chris first thing the next morning. Then my sister Megan, who dropped what she was doing at work to come sit with me and Caleb. Then my mother, Diane, who arrived within the hour with a casserole and a look on her face that told me she already suspected something like this had been coming for weeks, based on how distracted and distant Susan had sounded on the phone the last few times they'd spoken. She's not getting away with acting like the victim, Megan said, going through the printed messages with the calm precision of someone who used to do compliance work for a bank. We build the full picture first. Everything. Then we decide what to do with it. So we built it. Chris, who'd flown home from London the week after his conference, admitted he'd asked around discreetly before sending me that first photo, because he'd recognized Tyler from Susan's old Instagram posts and wanted to be sure before he said anything. Through him, we learned Tyler had a girlfriend back in the States the entire time, a woman named Rachel, a nurse, who had no idea her boyfriend had spent 8 months with a pregnant, then postpartum, engaged woman on another continent. We also learned, through a mutual friend still in the program, that Susan had seriously floated the idea of withdrawing entirely in July, only backing off when her firm reminded her she was contractually bound to 2 years of service back home in exchange for sponsoring her degree. Every discovery made the last one hurt less and the anger burn hotter. By the end of that week I had a folder 3 inches thick: messages, receipts, photos, financial records showing withdrawals from our joint account for gifts I now recognized weren't for me, and a very clear list of exactly who deserved to see it. The financial hit came first, because it was the simplest. I closed our joint account and moved what remained of our shared savings money we'd built for a wedding that would now never happen into an account in my name alone. I found $600 in charges on our card for a hotel in Brighton and a necklace from a shop in Chelsea, both time-stamped to nights she'd told me were study retreats. I disputed the charges as unauthorized joint account withdrawals used outside agreed household purposes, and with the documentation Megan helped me compile, the bank sided with me. It wasn't about the money. It was about her understanding that nothing she'd used to fund that affair had been free. The social unraveling came next, and I didn't even have to do much for it. We'd already sent save-the-date cards for a wedding date 8 months out. I sent one group text to our combined circle of friends: "The wedding is off, and I'll explain privately to anyone who asks." I explained privately to exactly 4 people, the ones closest to us, and by the following weekend the truth had spread through our friend group the way truth always does once someone finally says it out loud. Nobody defended her. A few of her closest college friends, the ones who'd been in her wedding party, stopped speaking to her entirely. Then Rachel. I debated for 2 days whether it was my business to reach out to a woman I'd never met, but I thought about Caleb, and I thought about how I would have wanted someone to warn me, and I decided silence would make me complicit in another betrayal. I sent her the photo, the dates, and a short, respectful message explaining who I was. She didn't respond to me, but 3 days later Chris heard from a mutual friend that she'd confronted Tyler with screenshots of her own. Apparently he'd left his laptop logged into an old account and left him within the week, taking his dog and, more satisfyingly to me, telling several mutual friends exactly why. Susan's parents, Robert and Linda, were harder. I'd known them for 6 years. They'd walked me around their backyard the day I proposed, told me they couldn't have picked a better man for their daughter. I drove to their house and laid the folder on their kitchen table the same way I'd laid it on Susan's, and I watched Linda's hand go to her mouth as she read the messages one page at a time. Robert didn't say a word until he'd finished the whole stack. Then he closed it, looked at me, and said, "I'm sorry, son. We had no idea." They didn't defend her. They asked, quietly, if they could still see their grandson. I told them of course Caleb hadn't done anything wrong, and neither had they. The career consequence I didn't even have to engineer. It arrived on its own, the way small industries tend to police themselves. Susan's firm had sponsored her master's degree on the condition she returned for 2 years of service. Word of the affair, and of how close she'd come to abandoning the program entirely for a man in another country, reached her supervisor through the same overlapping social circles that had already turned against her. 3 weeks after she came home, her firm quietly informed her the position she'd been promised no longer existed due to restructuring. Nobody had to say the real reason out loud. Everyone already knew. The last strike was the legal one, and it was the only one I approached without any anger in me at all, only clarity. I hired a family attorney and began the process of formalizing custody. I had 11 months of documentation showing I was Caleb's primary and, for most of that year, sole caregiver. Pediatrician visits I'd attended alone, daycare enrollment forms with only my signature, a paper trail of a father who had shown up every single day while his fiancée built a second life on another continent. The court granted me primary physical custody with supervised visitation for Susan, pending a review in 6 months. It wasn't revenge. It was protection. But I won't pretend it didn't feel like justice too. Watching what came after wasn't something I sought out, it found me anyway, the way these things always do in a life this interconnected. Susan moved back into her parents' house within a month, jobless, her return offer gone, most of her old friend group no longer returning her texts. Tyler, I heard through the same grapevine, had it worse in some ways. Rachel left him publicly enough that people in their shared professional circle started treating him like a punchline, and within 2 months he'd quietly relocated to another city entirely, apparently unable to show his face at the same conferences and alumni events where everyone now knew exactly what he'd done. Susan tried, in those early weeks, to fix things in ways that only made them worse. She showed up at my apartment twice unannounced, the first time in tears asking to talk, the second time with a bag of Caleb's old baby clothes as an excuse, clearly hoping I'd let her in. I didn't. I told her, calmly, that any further unannounced visits would violate the custody agreement and I would document them for the court. She sent messages for weeks after that, some apologetic, some accusatory, one long one blaming the pressure of the program, the isolation, even blaming me again for being too consumed with work and the baby. I didn't respond to any of them. I forwarded them to my attorney and let the silence do the talking. By the time our formal custody hearing rolled around 4 months later, she looked like a different person. Thinner in a way that wasn't healthy, dark circles she didn't bother covering, a kind of hollow, apologetic posture that hadn't been there a year earlier. She didn't fight the custody terms. Her attorney told mine she just wanted whatever time with Caleb the court would allow. I didn't feel triumphant watching her sign those papers. I mostly just felt tired, and relieved, and ready to stop thinking about her every day. That relief is where my own life actually started again. The first few months alone with Caleb were the hardest of my entire life, juggling full-time work with a toddler, learning to do bedtime routines and pediatrician appointments and grocery runs completely solo, but somewhere in the exhaustion, I found a rhythm that was entirely mine, built without anyone else's compromises in it. I started seeing a counselor, mostly at Megan's insistence, and for the first time in over a year I said out loud, to someone whose job it was to listen, how much I'd given up without ever asking whether it was being reciprocated. I picked up woodworking again that winter, something I hadn't touched since high school shop class, starting with a simple crib rail repair for Caleb's toddler bed and ending up building him an entire bookshelf shaped like a little train. Chris saw a photo of it and asked if I'd build one for his nephew. Then a coworker asked for a headboard. By spring I had a small side business, taking custom orders on weekends, and by summer it was bringing in enough that I cut back my hours at the firm and started genuinely enjoying my work again instead of just enduring it. I started running in the mornings before Caleb woke up, dropped the weight I'd quietly put on during the worst of the stress-eating months, and for the first time in years I looked in the mirror and recognized the person looking back. I met Emily that fall, at a single parents meetup Megan basically forced me to attend. She had a daughter Caleb's age, was recently out of a long relationship of her own, and had absolutely no interest in rushing into anything, which suited me perfectly. We took it slow, coffee first, then a few playdates disguised as adult conversation, then, eventually, dinners that were unmistakably dates. She never pushed me to talk about Susan before I was ready, and when I finally did, months in, she just listened, without judgment, without trying to fix it, which somehow fixed something in me anyway. What built between us wasn't dramatic or fast. It was steady, and real, and entirely free of the performance I hadn't realized Susan and I had been putting on for each other in our last year together. Our friends noticed the change before I fully did. Chris told me one night, watching me laugh with Emily across a backyard barbecue, that it was the first time in 2 years he'd seen me actually relax. Megan started saying, half joking, that Susan had done me the strangest favor of my life. Even Linda, Susan's own mother, told me quietly at a custody handoff one afternoon that she was glad to see me doing so well, that Caleb clearly adored me, and that whatever else had happened, she was grateful he had a father like me. I saw Susan for the last real conversation of our lives at Caleb's 3rd birthday party, nearly 2 years after that airport. She'd earned enough trust back through supervised visits that the court had expanded her time with him, and she came to the party looking better than she had at the hearing, steadier, employed again in some junior role, though still living, I'd heard, in a small apartment near her parents rather than anywhere she'd built for herself. She caught me near the drink table while Emily was helping Caleb blow out candles, and asked, quietly, if we could talk for a minute. I owe you an apology I never really gave you properly, she said. Not the version where I was defending myself. The real one. She looked, briefly, like she might cry. I lost my job. I lost most of my friends. Tyler wanted nothing to do with any of this the second it got hard, and I don't blame him, because I did the same thing to you first. I think about how good we had it, before, all the time. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I threw it away for something that wasn't even real. I looked at her for a long moment, and I felt, honestly, very little. Not rage anymore. Not grief. Just a quiet, settled clarity. I remember exactly what you did, I said. 8 months, while I raised our son alone and you told me every night how much you missed me. I don't need you to feel sorry for that forever. But I'm not interested in revisiting it, either. I gestured, without any performance in it, toward the yard, toward Emily crouched beside Caleb with frosting on her fingers, toward the life I'd built entirely without her. My life is good, Susan. Better than it's ever been. Thank you for that, honestly. I mean it. But that door's closed, and it's staying closed. She didn't argue. She just nodded, eyes wet, and walked back toward her car early, before the cake was even cut, and I watched a couple of the other parents at the party, people who knew the whole story by then, exchange a glance that told me I wasn't the only one who understood exactly what had just happened. 3 years after that birthday, I think about that conversation less and less, mostly because there's so much else filling my life now that there isn't much room left for it. My woodworking business grew into an actual storefront 2 years ago, employing 2 part-time hands during the busy season. Emily and I married last spring, a small backyard ceremony with Caleb, 6 years old now, as the world's most enthusiastic ring bearer, and her daughter as flower girl. We're expecting our second child together this winter. I hear about Susan occasionally, secondhand, through the same overlapping circles that once carried her secrets to me. Still living near her parents. A string of short jobs that never quite stick. No serious relationship that anyone's mentioned. I don't go looking for updates, and I don't feel the pull to check anymore the way I used to in that first raw year. What I feel, when her name comes up, is something closer to distant, settled gratitude for the son we share, for the life I rebuilt without her, for the fact that whatever she lost chasing something that was never going to last, I ended up finding something that will. Caleb fell asleep on my shoulder at his own birthday party last month, cake still on his chin, Emily laughing beside me with our daughter kicking in her stroller, and I remember thinking, with total certainty, that I wouldn't trade this life for the one I thought I was building 3 years ago, even if I could. Some doors close so a better one can open. Mine did. And walking through it, finally, without looking back, was the easiest decision I ever made.